Previously, I discussed that philosophy at its core deals with two fundamental questions: what is and how we know it. Those two questions in turn lead to other questions like how we should live our lives. So in this segment, I'll look at some important philosophical terms, questions, and various branches of philosophy. For example, what are the differences between ontology and epistemology, or between reason and logic, or between humanism and utilitarianism, or between existentialism and postmodernism? What is metaphysics? What is the difference between rationalism and empiricism? And what is phenomenology? And most importantly, why we grapple with the biggest question today between egalitarianism and elitism. Ontology versus epistemology. Early philosophy was based on two main questions: what is reality, which became ontology, and how we know it, which is epistemology. So ontology asks what is and what is not, and epistemology asks how we know the thing that exists or does not exist. For example, according to ontological philosophy, humans are either animals or not animals. If not animals, therefore humans are sacred and fundamentally valuable. It is accepted as a foundation based on your beliefs, so murdering a human being is one of the most serious crimes. So, thou shalt not kill is based on ontological notion that human life is sacred. So ontological philosophy gave birth to sciences in order to understand the world, nature, and human biology. Aristotle is usually considered the father of modern sciences. Epistemology, on the other hand, is about how we gather knowledge. A good example is how we know what we know. Immanuel Kant said we can never know reality as it is, but we only know things on a limited level. Why? Because everything has to funnel through the human mind, which is structured in a way that categorizes things in a certain way. In other words, we humans put a structure onto the world based on how the human mind works. And the world in itself is unknowable to us because we cannot get out of our human mind. We can never know the thing in itself. Michel Foucault went a step further, saying that knowledge is power, meaning those in possession of science and technology have immense power over others. He said there's no impartial or power-free science. Knowledge is a tool in the hands of the powerful. I'll discuss this more later. So to sum up, ontology is the philosophy of existence, while epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge of that existence. Metaphysics versus physics. Physics was part of philosophical studies until a few centuries ago, before it became a separate discipline. Physics mainly studies matter, from the smallest particles to the biggest stars. Metaphysics, however, is the study of what is beyond the physical world, like ideas, forms, and soul, which is closer to the religious idea of God and the spirits. A scientist might say human consciousness is rooted in matter and would not exist without brain cells. A metaphysician, on the other hand, might say consciousness is independent of matter, either comes from a higher power or the universe itself is conscious. So physics is the study of physical matter, while metaphysics is the study of non-physical entities. Reason versus logic. Logic has its origins in mathematics. For example, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is logical because it follows a very rigid rule that gives you one answer. But logic is also used as a language of philosophy in order to communicate philosophical ideas. So logic is like a foundation on which philosophical debates take place. Without logic, it is very hard to talk to other people because in order for a discussion to take place, there has to be some ground basic rules on which all philosophers agree. So logic is a method of communication for philosophical arguments. A good example is Ludwig Wittgenstein, who wanted to make communication as precise as possible. Also, Bertrand Russell applied mathematics to philosophy. Reason and logic often go hand in hand. Since logic is very rigid, like a computer or a game of chess, some argue it limits human ability to express things that go beyond logic, like human emotions and passion. So reason or rationality is somewhat more subjective and less scientifically rigorous like logic. So reason is often used to persuade people, while logic's outcome is independent. In other words, if someone uses logic, the outcome might not benefit the argument, while reason is a bit more selective. so people use reason to support their argument. We often use rationalization as a negative form of reason used to persuade people. Logic is more mathematical, while reason is more linguistic. Rationalism versus empiricism. Rationalism is a school of philosophy that believes we understand the world based on our prior ability to reason. It places human beings as a special creature with the ability to know the world, so it has its roots in religion that places human beings as an exception to the animal kingdom. In other words, we are pre-assembled with reason as a tool. A good example of a rationalist is René Descartes, who famously said, "I think, therefore I am." In other words, the ability to rationally think was enough to know our existence. Leibniz was another famous rationalist. Empiricism, on the other hand, believes that we know the world through experience. Our thoughts come as a result of experience. We know the property of fire because we experience the heat. Babies have no fear of fire inside them from birth. We experience the pain, therefore we associate fire with pain. Empiricism is more British, while rationalism is more continental European, mainly French and German. Famous empiricists were John Locke and David Hume. Empiricism is also close to pragmatism, most associated with Northern European cold climates, which make you become more practical. Immanuel Kant combined rationalism and empiricism in his philosophy, saying that experience is not enough to know the world. Our own mental structure imposes categories to the world. In other words, we are not passive, just receiving knowledge through experiences, but we actively give the world a structure. He said we cannot know the world as it is, but we know it as our mind is structured. But our knowledge of the world is limited to the limit of the human mental structure. Kant's philosophy also gave rise to phenomenology that studies an object relative to our own experience, not the object in of itself. Kant made a distinction between phenomena, which is how we experience the world, and noumena, which is the world in itself, which we can never know. I'll discuss this later. So, for rationalists, we know the world because we know, while for empiricists, we know the world because we experience things. Political philosophy versus ethics. Ethics is the branch of philosophy that deals with morality, justice, and the legal system. Ethics is more practical and pragmatic, while political philosophy deals with how societies decide what is right and what is wrong, and how to live peacefully in a society, and how we punish those who break rules. As a society evolves, so does its morality. So ethics change. Something that might be morally acceptable a few centuries ago is not acceptable today. It also depends on culture. Some actions are morally right in one culture, but not in another. Political philosophy is the study of ethics and how it changes. Egalitarianism versus elitism. One of the most fundamental questions philosophy has grappled over centuries is the idea of equality versus quality. Egalitarian philosophy has its roots in religions such as Christianity, that all humans have equal dignity and are equally sacred. But egalitarianism as a philosophy became prominent in Europe during the Enlightenment period of 18th and 19th centuries. Karl Marx is perhaps the most famous egalitarian philosopher who believed in a communist society where all the resources were shared equally among people. Elitism, on the other hand, believes that we should run society based on meritocracy, meaning not everyone gets a trophy. Some people deserve certain rights and privileges because they earn those things. Elitism has its roots in nature because the animal kingdom runs on a hierarchy, which is part of the evolutionary process. The most famous elitist philosopher was Friedrich Nietzsche, who incidentally lived around the same time as Marx. For Nietzsche, great artists and philosophers are not the same as ordinary people, therefore should not be treated so. Today, the biggest debate in the West is these two schools of thought: equality for all or privileges for those who earn them. So, egalitarian philosophy believes in equality for all, while elitist philosophy believes in merits. Humanism versus utilitarianism. Humanism was born in Europe during the Enlightenment of 18th century, which replaced God with humans. Instead of the divine being in charge of this planet, we rational humans assumed the ownership of this planet. Humanists believe in an egalitarian world where all humans are equal, which is rooted in religions and belief that humans are created equal. But in reality, that is not true. Not all humans are equal. Some are more equal than others, as George Orwell famously said in Animal Farm. So in philosophy, the big question is this: which humans should determine our social, political, and moral values? Here comes utilitarianism, a branch of humanism that believes in moral values that benefit the greatest number of people. Not all humans, but the largest majority of humans. The word utility focuses on how something benefits someone. Pre-Enlightenment world was dominated by kings and aristocrats, while the majority worked to benefit the minority. With its roots in Machiavelli's philosophy of end justifies the means, utilitarianism turned it on its head. Instead of the minority, it focused on the majority. All actions should be judged by the results that bring the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Utilitarianism was big in England, and the most famous one was Jeremy Bentham and later Stuart Mill. Today's democracy is a little like utilitarian majority rule, at least on paper. Humanism also gave birth to other isms such as socialism that divides the world based on class, feminism that divides the world based on gender, and nationalism that divides the world based on nationality or ethnicity or language. So humanism puts humans in charge of the planet, and utilitarianism says the majority of humans. Postmodernism versus existentialism. Existentialism, popularized after the philosophy of Nietzsche, argues that everything starts with our existence, not God or some divine essence. There is no divine spark, but we just develop a sense of self during our life. Nothing is given to us prior to our birth. A famous existentialist philosopher was Jean-Paul Sartre, who said that since we have no essence, we are responsible to make something of ourselves. He famously said that we are condemned to be free. While existentialism is concerned with the individual, postmodernism, popularized in France, is more concerned with communities or cultural groups. Just like existentialism, it is also rooted in the philosophy of Nietzsche, specifically in his criticisms of a single truth within the Western philosophical tradition. While existentialism focuses on the condition of the modern existence, postmodernism focuses on the idea of truth and social values. Western philosophy believed in a single truth, like the idea of a single God. So postmodernism questioned European modernity as a project to unify the whole world around European values of individualism, freedom, and materialism. According to postmodernists, all cultures are as valid as European culture. Therefore, the world doesn't have to become like Europe to be considered civilized. Postmodernism is a reaction to modernity, which includes the Enlightenment humanism on the one hand, but colonialism on the other. Postmodernists put emphasis on power relations, how the weak are forcefully pushed to one side. A famous postmodernist, Michel Foucault, analyzed how the modern state developed effective tools to control people through the prison system, surveillance, mass education, and more. He argued that even sexuality is a power dynamics, men oppressing women, which had a huge influence on the third wave feminism that some argue has become anti-men, anti-masculinity. Foucault even said all knowledge is tied to power, so there is no independent science. Therefore, science and technology are tools for the powerful to control the weak. So to sum up, the core philosophy includes ontology of existence and epistemology of knowledge, and everything else is a branch of these two. Physics and metaphysics are part of ontology. Physics deals with matter, while metaphysics deal with non-material phenomena such as ideas, consciousness. Reason and logic, rationalism and empiricism are part of epistemology. Reason is a tool to persuade others, therefore more subjective, while logic is mathematical and impartial. Rationalism says knowledge comes from within, while empiricism says knowledge only comes from experience or outside. So outside ontology and epistemology is the philosophy of how to live. Political philosophy studies morality of good and bad, equality or meritocracy, majority mass or minority elite. This is also tied to the meaning of life. Existentialism puts emphasis on the individual, while postmodernism put emphasis on the group identity. Next, I'll look at the differences between Eastern and Western philosophies, why one focuses on physical science while the other on mental well-being. Which should we prioritize, building rockets to conquer space or do yoga for a more peaceful mind on Earth?